You're trying to juggle work life, home life. You're trying to juggle everyone saying, she's gone and left the children and so she's out working. And it's really on the employer to create a safe space for them where they feel comfortable to share.
Hi, welcome to Changing Suits. My name's Bal.
My name's Taj.
And I just gave a bit of a look because our guest speaker just asked which one's Bal and which one's Taj. So I'm like, yep, that's me, Bal, and that's Taj. Okay, so in this week's episode, this guest speaker, who is Ash Ahmad, is a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. So we're now looking at the workplace and what it means of having that diversity and why it's so important within the workplace as well. So, Ash, could you just introduce yourself a little bit, please?
Thank you. So I'm Ash Ahmad. I'm a diversity, as you've been told, I'm a
Just
diversity
repeat.
equity and inclusion consultant. So about coming up to actually it's 2 years in a couple of days that I decided to step out of the corporate world and started working for myself. So I go into organizations and I help them throughout every aspect of the organization, whether it's their training, whether it's their policies, whether it's their leadership, training for employees across the whole organization, looking at their marketing side. But how can we make sure that we are creating an inclusive and diverse organization where everyone, particularly those from marginalized groups, can thrive? And understanding that we all do not have the same starting point, and understanding how can organizations support those individuals that start from a place a lot more behind than others, and how can we support them to make sure that they have equal access to opportunities like others.
What do you mean by not starting from the same starting point?
So let's take us, for example, right? We're from the South Asian community, and this is very important. And I will say this, it's important that we do not box ourselves into one. So even though we come from the South Asian community, my starting point, like, but your starting point may be different to mine because where we grew up might have been different, socioeconomic background. So sometimes it's understanding that our privilege, what are our privileges? Like, did you have access to mentors while you were growing up? I didn't. My parents didn't work the traditional 9 to 5 job. My mum doesn't speak any English, and my dad had to really figure out his own way. So when I stepped into the workplace, I had no idea how to navigate in the workplace politics and all of that. I had to figure that out for myself, whereas others potentially do have that. Their parents have got, stepped into the corporate world. They have had certain privileges. I had no books growing up in my household. I had to really do things for myself. It wasn't my parents' fault. It was just my dad was working crazy 20 hours and my mum couldn't help me with my homework because she didn't speak English.
But then, Ash, when you say we can't box people up, and I completely agree and understand what you're saying, when we're looking at a community, whichever community it is, so for example, this whole term BAME, I've spoken to someone previously who didn't like the word BAME, and you're sort of saying, no, you don't like it either. And I'm assuming the same thing when we say the South Asian, where you've said, look, we might not have had the same start. The problem is if we don't box ourselves, then we've not got a starting point.
Yeah, and what's important in that, Val, is that we recognize that me and you will have certain challenges that only me and you will know of, right? There's definitely similarities, but we need to understand intersectionalities. Like I'm a woman, I'm a mother, I'm a Muslim woman, I'm a woman of color, the child of immigrant parents that came to this country. Like, I and your situation might be different, right? So it's understanding you might not have children, therefore you won't have the challenges that I face in the workplace because of that, or you may not, or just understanding that we all have intersectionalities, understanding that even though as South Asians we will definitely have certain things that we would both find challenging and that absolutely apply to us, like the microaggressions that we face, having our names, when people listen to our names, having to change our name on CV, that's going to be something that we both get impacted by. Taj, you're wearing the turban, right? And that's your identity as a hijabi. Like, if a hijab, that someone may consider, look at you and say, oh, she's Muslim. They're making that assumption about you without even knowing, because you're wearing the turban. Your challenges may be different to mine because you may face more discrimination than I, because you wear the turban, because you wear something that visibly makes you part of a religion, right? And it's understanding that even though we have similar challenges, there are people that have more challenges because of the intersectionality. So I want to touch upon what you said, Bal, about the BAME aspect. we can't say BAME because we know that the lived experience of, say, Black people is going to, when it comes to racism, is worse than any other race, right? Is understanding that their lived experience are probably going to be a lot worse than ours. I'm not saying that's the case for everyone, but that is something that we need to recognize. And when we say that actually in organizations, let's look at our BAME number where we're boxing all the Black, Asian, minority ethnics. But if we were to break that down, what if there's only one Black person in that organization or one minority ethnic? But because we've boxed them, it looks as though, oh, we're doing so great, but actually we're really not.
But if we set our sight, if we say, right, we're different like this, are we almost putting the challenges up ourselves and going into a workplace and saying, oh, because we're Asian, we might be treated different? So mentally, we're already putting those things in our mind that we might be treated differently.
Taj, we need to look at systemic biases that exist. There's so many things that have already been set up to make people fail in the workplaces. There's so much research out there that when someone puts a name on there that sounds, like a South Asian name, they will automatically get put at the bottom of the list. There's so much research out there that when the same image of a person without a headscarf and with a headscarf, I know that's Muslim identity, but there's so many South Asians that are Muslims, right? Even yourself, you were the Sikhs. After the 9/11, let's be honest, like Sikhs were impacted massively because automatically they were considered they're Muslims as well, right? So we need to understand these things that actually there's already systemic issues that are already put in place. Pay, for example, that's such a big issue. We look at gender pay, but if we were to break that down to ethnicity, you'd be shocked, and it's a real thing. So it's understanding that, yeah, like I'm going to go into the workplace, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt, but don't be surprised. Like, it shouldn't come out, we're not putting it in our minds, it exists. And sometimes when people say to us, no, it's in your head, it's in your head, that's almost like gaslighting us. Like, we're gaslighting ourselves, gaslighting each other by telling us, no, it's all in your head. No, it's reality, and it happens to so many of us. I've had personal experiences of it, and I probably wouldn't have noticed it or realized it until I decided to step away from the corporate world. And when I left out, I was like, wow, there were so many things that I couldn't even see, and it had to take me to remove myself to start unlearning certain behaviors, and sometimes we even become part of the problem.
Can you give us an example of what you talk? Because I completely agree with everything you're saying. It makes sense, and I just want to talk about something that's actually come out quite recently about the police, which you won't be shocked that I'm going to bring up. But before we do that and have that conversation, what is it that you went through that when you step back, you realize actually that wasn't appropriate? What was going on?
For me, like, I always spoke about my pain. Like, I did so much in, whether in DE&I and training, and I would always go back and say, I don't feel like I'm being paid correctly. I don't feel like I'm paid correctly. I was always told, no, you're okay. No, you're okay. But when you believe, like, you're not being paid fairly. And I remember one of the things that my manager, who my values no longer aligned with, and I decided actually it was time for me to step away, was when he said to me, oh, you think you're the finished product? And I was like, wow,
What
like,
does
I
that
never,
mean?
like, you think that you're ready, and one minute it was like, oh, you'll get a promotion, like, just give it another 6 months. But then when I decided to hand in my resignation, then I was given, oh, here, take a couple of grand pay rise. And I said, okay, so is my promotion going to be considered and my pay going to be reviewed? And no, that's not going to happen now. And when I left the organization, and I tell you, this is when I knew that I was massively underpaid, because before I decided to work for myself, I just kind of put my CV out there. There were 2 interviews I went for, and recruiters were reaching out to me, and they sent me for 2 interviews. Both roles were offering me 20K more than my
Oh
previous.
my! I
And
thought you were just talking about a few thousand, but
no,
20K is a massive amount.
the recruiter said, I can't believe how massively underpaid you are. And I was like, I'm not gonna lie, like, I was crying in that moment, because almost like I've been waiting for someone to validate how I've been feeling, and it's not happened. And then since I've left, the amount of South Asian women, the pay disparity has, and coaching them through these conversations, like, am I being paid fairly in comparison to my colleagues?
Ash, can you practically tell us, because that's a really interesting question, is there a way that you can find out what pay level you should be at.
This is the thing, right? This is the thing. So we have always been told you should not discuss pay in the workplace,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
It's
yeah.
almost like illegal to speak. No, it's not. No, it's not. It's absolutely. I actually think that a person, an ally, will tell you if they know that you're upset about pay, you've spoken about pay, and if they're a real ally, they will be quite transparent about their pay. You're two people doing the exact same job, and you find out that your colleague is being paid 5 to 10 grand more than you.
How how often does that actually happen in the real world?
You'd be shocked. Honestly, you'd be shocked. And that's why organizations are told that they should, it's recommended, right, that we should do ethnicity pay gap. It needs to be mandated, because let me tell you, so we talk about gender pay gap, so we're already at a disadvantage, right? Because they'll class us as women, right? They'll say we are women, and because of that we're already going to have a gap. Now let's break that down even more to ethnicity. Well, let me tell you, our pay in comparison to so many white counterparts, I've seen it, and the other thing that played out for me was I was seeing women, white women, progress. And I remember I wanted to progress and to the next level. And I cannot tell you what I was doing. Like I was literally working so hard to get that promotion. And I remember this one leader turned around and said, "Oh, she was throwing her toys out the pram. So I just gave her a promotion." And I'm sat
Like
there.
you didn't deserve it, basically. So that's just like you didn't
Another
deserve
manager
it.
said that he didn't realize that I was having my own, like I've been talking about this promotion, but I'm like, here's other people in other departments just getting promotions like that. Here's me trying so hard, literally doing everything, but I'm constantly being told, not ready yet, not ready yet.
Ash, I completely agree with you. I mean, I've said this previously, but it's interesting to see just visually. So I used to go to uni in London, and it's interesting to see that a lot of the students that were there were from Asian origin, wherever you were from. But those people that were going to work were Caucasian. They were
What? Yeah.
white.
What happened?
So
Yeah.
what
Exactly.
happened?
And then coming back to something Taj said at the very start, right? Taj, you said, like, is it in our minds? Okay, let me tell you, go into an organization. All you have to do is look at the senior leadership team.
Yeah.
That's If you look at the senior leadership team and they're homogenous, they're all one, like from one background, they are all white, male, or even if they are females, they're still from the same race, then automatically it's not in your head. That you're going into something already set up. Someone did a post once, like a little tweet. A senior leadership team. I can't remember word for word, but the gist of it was a senior leadership team made of white male middle class men is a microaggression in itself. Like, it's without telling you, it's almost like, well, I definitely can't see myself in those positions because it doesn't exist.
Do you know the sad thing is, and I've actually been through this myself in my last employed role, and it is a case of when you sort of see that, and it was a very big organization, and we've got those whole EDI indicators and all that sort of stuff, massive organization, international, but it sort of puts you at well, actually, if that's not something that they value in true essence, from what we're seeing, not from the figures that we've been told and the conversations we're pretending to have, then why am I here? And that's actually one of the reasons that I decided to leave
Mm.
my own role, because it's, well, you're not being valued, so just get on with it. What is it? There's no point in
And
me
this
sitting there
is
complaining about it.
The question is it right to leave or is it right to stay there and
Fair.
fight?
Yeah, good point.
That is a question in itself. What do you think, Ash?
and so what I will say to you, Taj, is in that situation is looking at what you can handle, like your mental capacity. Like, it's a lot. Like, I have been doing this work, right, for on my own for 2 years, right? But prior to that, I've been in DE&I space alongside all my roles for it's coming up to nearly 10 years, and it's a lot. You're having to relive your own traumas over and over again to make change. And you know what? Like, I love what I do because I think if I can change even a small part of the world that I operate in, like, I'm gonna keep fighting it. But not everyone can. Like, there, you need to ask yourself if you can, and if you're like, I'm gonna, like, that's great. But if you feel like if it comes at a cost to your mental health, your well-being, your family life, your personal, like, you need to ask yourself, is it worth it? And if what you said, Bal, like everything becomes quite performative, like, oh, we look great, we're saying all the great things, but actually I don't feel valued, then the question is, are they really going to change? Like, what is it going to take? And can you, and there's hope. Like, that's what I do, and I believe that there's hope for everyone, as long as that we're having the right conversations and whatnot. But like, you ask yourself, is that worth the fight for me? Like, and I think to myself, like, 100% we should all try our best, but if it comes at a cost to your well-being, then I say your well-being comes before anything.
Okay, so I've got a question in that case. Even if you look at the lists of the richest people in the world, or like you said, people at the top of a company, they are a majority white faces. But then are we now saying that, and this is, I suppose, a very generic generalization of the whole system, are we saying that Asian people aren't as smart, and we're just complaining that there are white faces at the top? It's just we couldn't get there. What's your view on that, Ash? I know I
Well,
saw your face going, what the hell? How dare she say that? But this is a really...
well,
Go
well,
for it, Ash.
I'm someone that literally used to have to do, like, I do my son's homework with him, and I
I
know
thought you were
that
going to say for him. I was like, that's where the problem
no,
is. I do
no,
for him.
with him. I
Yeah,
do
yeah,
his reading with him every
yeah,
single day. Like,
yeah.
you have to spend half an hour to an hour every single day with them. So I didn't have that. Like, I did not have that. Not only did I have to figure it out for myself, and I know I'm not the only one, right? I know I'm not the only one. I also had other challenges that I had to face. Like, I went to go, like, when I left university, right, I joined a management training program. I was renting cars. Can you imagine what the South Asian community was saying about me being in a male dominated organization? It did not go down well. I was like a glorified taxi driver. It did not go down well. Despite all these challenges, like working so hard, never having a parent to sit down and do my homework with me, having to work so hard, twice as hard, right? Because I didn't have books. I wasn't given books at home to read. I only started reading books in my 20s. Like, even after university, I'd say I started reading books, because it was never a thing in my home. I started learning. I had to teach myself. You telling me that I don't have it in me to get to senior league? Hell yeah, I do. Hell yeah. So we all do. We are like, there's no such thing as not smart enough. It's understanding, how are we helping people? Are we setting them up to win? And it's thinking about, if you go into a workplace, Bal, and in that workplace you're not valued, are you going to be able to perform at your absolute best? No, you're not. No, you're absolutely not going to be able to perform at your absolute best. If you have a manager that's encouraging you, valuing you, really putting you, sponsoring you, cheerleading on for you, being a real ally and helping you progress, are you going to perform at your best? Do you have the potential to get to senior leadership position? Absolutely yes. We've also been under this pretense that there's a certain kind of style that we have to be leaders, right? And that doesn't necessarily fit into what the South Asian, let's look at women, for example, how we've been traditionally told to be, like, stay quiet, stay in the kitchen, do all of that. So then you go into the workplace and you're trying to navigate and you're trying to be assertive. Just no, like, the systems need to change to help us and help us perform at our best. We all have the ability.
Do you think it starts at school age? Because I've
Oh
seen
yeah,
my
listen.
children, with my children, I had my son coming home, and my daughter does this as well. We didn't get an award for this, and it's a certain child from a white background. I feel like upset to say it, but I would say the best known, or you had the groups at school. You had the pretty girls that were always white, and the Asian girls. You weren't at the top of the table because it was always groups. That the pretty ones were all the white ones, and
I was
maybe
gonna
this.
start laughing because in my head all I could think about was we were too hairy.
But this is it. This is it. In our minds, we weren't shown to be pretty because society said you had to be. If you're
Look a
white,
certain
you're
way.
pretty. If you're, and then these pretty people get chosen for awards and stuff like that. So in our minds, we're thinking, okay, we don't deserve it. When we go into the workplace, we just have to put up with it because we don't deserve it. do you think there's an element starting right from school
Oh
age
yeah.
and still happening
Yep.
now?
100%. 100%. This is why I've become, like, one of the reasons why I became a governor is because I genuinely believe that the issue starts from school. I was speaking to a friend the other day, and she told me, she said, a child said to her son, "I can't play with you because of the color of your skin. He's brown,
Oh
and
my
the other
God,
child
is
is
that
How
white."
still
old is
happening?
Let me tell you something. Where does that start from? Because that child
Parents.
wasn't born. That child wasn't born like that, right?
Mm.
That child wasn't
No,
born
definitely look, because yes,
saying
last
that.
week I was talking to my son and I found this funny, but it is cute. And he really loves learning about Black history. And to a point where I was thinking, why is he this interested in it? And only last week, me and my daughter, who's 10, was talking to him, and he goes, "Oh, Mum, I'm Black."
Oh,
And I was
that's so cute.
like, "Hey?" And we were like, "No, you're not Black." "Yes, I am Black." And then I don't understand where he got this idea that he was Black. It didn't matter that he isn't Black, but because he was so passionate about the topic, thinking that he was Black, it was a bit of a shock to him. But then that just shows children don't see color.
But we
I
need to
was,
teach them. We need
yeah,
to teach them. Like, we grow up and there's so many people that say, and you know what? It's very interesting you say that because at that age they don't. They just play. Like, my son was explaining to his auntie about his best friend, one of his best friends, and he was like to his auntie, "Oh, do you know how my best friend looks like?" And then she was like, "No." And then he described him as he's got short legs and he's got small hair. Like, he just couldn't understand. There were at no point was color mentioned, but unfortunately, like, we need to have conversations with our children at some point about that they may be treated differently because of the color of their skin, and that's going to happen. And then when you think about it, about the Black community, they face it when it comes to racism. They get the worst part of it. So
I
imagine those kind of
I wouldn't say
conversations.
it's the worst part, Ash. I would say that we do get, because
No, no,
I'm worried.
I'm not saying.
Yeah,
But you need
because
to
I'm worried
understand,
about
like,
my
think about
children.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah, like, and we have that same worry. But to know, like, slavery and the racism that Black people have faced for so many years, and even look within our own society, right? We think about in our own society, only what, 10 years ago, we had Bollywood actresses talking about how we can be fair. There's racism within our own society that the
Oh
lighter
yeah.
you are, the prettier, the fairer you are, that's pretty, but the darker you are, so what does that tell us? Who gets the worst kind of treatment? I remember growing up, and, like, my skin tone was slightly darker than my sisters, and I was told, "Oh, bichari, bichari, like, she's gonna struggle to get married." Like, who even gives a damn about getting married? Like, why was that the concern of the elderly parents? But it's a thing, it's a real thing.
Mm. Can I go back to the fact of the workplace? Now, D, E, and I. Um, there was a conversation again at the start of the conversation where we said, oh, usually the E in the acronym stands for equality. However, in your title, you have said it's equity. So diversity, equity, and inclusion. Can you explain why you decided to say equity rather than equality?
Well, I think just the conversations we've been having now, understanding that our starting points are very different, and understanding that actually I can't, like, if I say, right, Bal and Ash, they are both mothers, right, and they both are going to need these adjustments in the workplace or whatever. Well, that may not, it might not work for me and you. Like, our situations may be completely different. Like, I have grandparents that are able to look after my child, and you might not have that support. Therefore, it becomes very difficult for you. So even though I might say I need to come a little bit later in the morning, you might say, no, I say I'm fine for the morning, like, it's fine. You're going to say, well, I need to be able to drop my kids off, pick them up, because I don't have that childcare available for me. So it's understanding that we have different needs, and it's making sure that our policies are reflecting that within the workplace. Are they equitable? Because we can't generalize, because everyone's situation is different. And it's like disabled people, right? Disabled people, if someone has, or if someone is autistic, you can't make a generalization that these are what they need, because the spectrum of autism is huge, right? There's people could be at either end of the spectrum. Some may require no adjustments because they think I'm absolutely fine. Some may just need slight, but some may need a lot of adjustments. And it's making sure that we're tailoring it to individual needs. as opposed to just generalizing it and saying, right, actually, as South Asian people, Bal, Ash, and Taj need the exact same things. Well, no, because we all have different needs.
Now, flipping it to the other side, just thinking of the employer's point of view. Now, say if it was a small employer, for example, and they had about 5 people in the office and not much of a budget to, I don't know, help with certain things. And how do you think, on the just thinking as the employer, is it possible to support different people with different needs? It is
Speak to
required and it
people.
is important,
Yeah.
but as an employer, it costs money to do that as well for a startup business or whatever. How do you think it would be the other way around if we were the employer?
I think
And had,
speak to people, and sometimes the adjustments are so small. Like, for example, it's Ramadan right now, right? And there's so many people asking for flexibility in terms of working. That's not going to be at a cost. But imagine as an employer, I do that for my employees. My employees are going to really, really appreciate that. Like, my employer really tried their best to make sure that they could accommodate my needs. Of course, business needs come, like, the business needs come first. And if it's a case of, well, I can't have every single one of you, if there's like, I don't know, five Muslims in one, Muslims in one team, for example, I can't have all of you lot starting at 9, 10 o'clock, because we have clients coming in right in the morning. But could you have like a rota where one starts late, then the other one, and it's speaking to your people. Like, we can always give recommendations. Like, I always give recommendations of best practices, but I always come back to speak to your people, ask them what they need. And sometimes, like you said, Taj, sometimes we think, okay, it's going to come at a cost. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's little things, like someone that's neurodiverse, like they may just require a space, right, that they can go to and just work in silence. Or they may say, can I keep my headphones on? There's some organizations that say, no, we don't allow headphones. You need to be like at work, collaborating, open policy, whatnot. But actually, some people need that to block out the noise so they can concentrate on their work. So the adjustment sometimes could be so small, and I don't think that we should fear that actually it's so much, it's going to cost me so much, and I don't want to go down that road. I don't want to go down that road.
Can I just, in regards to what you've said and the clients that you've worked with, how often, especially from the South Asian community, because obviously that's what we tend to the podcast about, how often do people ask for the things that they need and these slight adjustments from the employers?
Do you know what? It's a shame. Like, a lot of the time, it's a struggle, and the reason why I say this is because for so long we've been made to feel like we have to fit in, so we change parts of our identities. And this is the struggle, I feel like, the more senior people go into their positions, like, as South Asians, like, we have certain challenges that we face. Like, we spoke about like the home life and stuff. And I know it's the case for so many people, but we have that added pressure from like the elders still saying, well, it's your responsibility. So you're trying to juggle work life, home life. You're trying to juggle everyone saying, she's gone and left her children at home. She's gone and left her children, and so she's out working. Like, there's so many pressures that we have to deal with. But then we're trying to fit into the workplace as well. Like, that's a real heavy burden for us. And then trying to navigate that, trying to cover parts of our identity to fit in. No one's going to want to talk about the adjustments for them. And it's really on the employer to create a safe space for them, a psychologically safe space for them, where they feel comfortable to share. Because I'll be honest with you, personal experience and so many other experiences, people don't want to talk about the adjustments that they need or the flexibility that they need because they're too afraid that they're not going to fit in and it's going to come at a cost. Even like when it comes to discrimination, you'll be so shocked. I like I've spoken to so many people that have had racist stuff said to them, right? The typical one is the P word. And I think regardless of where you are in the South Asian community, everyone seems to get that word because everyone seems to think that anyone that's brown is the P word, right? So they call them that. And the amount of people that have said, no, I've not taken this to my employer because what's the point? They're not going to do anything about it.
but then, yeah, I do agree because I've worked in places where I have faced racism. So I would say about 15 years ago, I faced racism, took it up to my management. They didn't know how to
Okay.
deal with it. And then like 15 years later, same thing, and you'd think things have moved on. It felt like I was just back where I was 15
Mhm.
years ago. Faced racism, they just didn't know how to deal with it. We had a because it was obviously in COVID, we had online discussions about how we should treat people and stuff like that. And people were asked to put their names in and do some research about it. And I don't like using this word, but the coloured people, no one put their hands up because we knew this was a tick box exercise.
And Taj, how did that make you feel? Like, if that incident was to happen again, would you ever feel comfortable, or would you be like, well, what's the point? I've done this. I've been in this situation twice now. Nothing's happened. What's the point?
Well, it made me at the time feel, what's the point? Because I thought that things have not changed 15
No.
years on. And the trauma does come back from what I suffered from years ago, because I remember the stuff that I had to go through 15 years ago.
And is that going to help you ever perform at your best, knowing that that's happening to you and nothing's being done about it?
No, no, you're right.
Are
It
you
won't.
going to give discretionary effort to your employer, knowing
No,
that
you
they
won't,
didn't
because if
support
you're not
you?
in a happy, yeah, if you're not in a happy place, happy, what is it? There is a saying, happy workers, happy, you'll do better work, basically. If the workers aren't happy, slowly you'll be like, why am I bothering? They don't value me. Why
And
should I
that's
bother?
why systems need to be put into place to support what, like, there needs to be a clear reporting procedure, right? There needs to be clear channels where you can report, and there needs to be clear policies that if there is discrimination, this is your role as an employee. Like, if you're faced with it or you witness it, this is what you need to do. These are your responsibilities. As a manager, this is what you need to do. Managers, the thing that really bothers me is when managers get put into managerial positions and are just expected to manage teams without any adequate support, and they're like, oh yeah, go on leadership and managing employees and motivation. Well, whereas dealing with harassment and discrimination in the workplace, because that's key. Your first point of contact is your manager. If your manager's like, I don't know how to deal with that, like, that's problematic, because they are the first person you need to go to. They need to know how to have that conversation, validating your feelings,
But
making
in this,
you know.
yeah, but in this day and age, you'll have all those policies in place. But the thing is, we're short staffed, so that things need to, like, the actual work needs to be priority. They won't say that, but that is the case
This is
in quite a lot
this
of
is why,
places.
like, one of the things that we really really push in organizations is accountability. Like, you need accountability. You can't operate from this place of, we're just going to give someone a slap on the hand and that's it, we're done. No, people need to be held accountable for their actions, because people need to know that if they are ever discriminated against, something's going to actually be done about it. And in addition to that, those that are the ones that are discriminating know that this organization has a zero tolerance policy. Like, there's zero tolerance, so they're going to think twice before they do something like that. You're not going to be able to change everyone, right? You're not going to be able to change everyone. You're always going to have people, but if you have accountability in place, that's going to make them think twice, because it's going to make them think about, actually, this is going to impact my progression. And if you hold managers and leaders, like, these are the leaders of the business, are you measuring them on their DE&I? Like, how many people have they helped progress that are from marginalized groups? How many people have they supported and sponsored? And if they are not marked against that, well, then things are never going to change, right?
But then it comes to the other thing. I'm just thinking about politics. We're talking about councillors, and it has to be, I think, Bal, you'll be able to correct me because you're more the politics side of things, that there has to be one person from a minority groups that has to stand in position. Is that right, Bal?
So it depends on the area, doesn't it? So
Yeah.
positive discrimination, in essence, is what you're referring
But
Let's
to.
say
make
if
sure that we're not doing positive discrimination and it's positive action. Because if you're literally, that positive discrimination is illegal in this country. You're not allowed to pick someone based on, you know, oh yeah, like, based upon, oh, it's the diverse candidate, oh, it was, the color of their skin, or it was, it was someone with a disability, we had to go with that. Like, you can't, you have to pick the best person. The only way you could do this is if you've got two candidates that are exactly the same skills, and that you literally don't know which one to pick over them, and the only thing that's difference between them is, a characteristic of a diversity, then you can take positive action and go with that for that reason. But you cannot positively discriminate where you say, actually, I need to tick a box. So even though one person may be better than the other, you say, actually, no, I'm going to go with someone from a different sexual orientation because we need to tick a box. That's actually illegal. So it's very
That's really
important that we
interesting.
understand
In some workplaces, it is a case of if someone's got a disability, they're automatically put through for an interview, even if their skill sets aren't right. Now, is that right? Because their skill
that.
sets might
Again,
not
it's
be
very,
right.
very, you need to make sure that you are grabbing a pool, talent pool that is diverse. You're getting people, you are actively going out to search. If someone completely does not match the skill set, then that's probably problematic. But if someone meets 6 of the 10 criterias, then yeah, like put them through, because you might be. And we've looked at this, and there's so much research on it, where women will make sure that they have like 10 out of 10 of the skills that are required on a job spec before they apply for the job, whereas a man will look at a lot less. I think it was 6 or even lower.
Oh,
um
wow.
yeah, and then they'll
Well, that
apply
is
for the
true. 'Cause
job.
I've done that so many times. Why do we do that? Why do
Because
we?
we've been, listen, like, okay, I'm going to bring up imposter syndrome, right? We talk about imposter syndrome because we've always been made to, like, I have a real problem with the imposter syndrome, because we weren't born feeling like imposters, right? We weren't born feeling like I couldn't do this or I couldn't achieve this. At some point in our life, like when I coach women, right, when I'm my coaching clients, one of the things they'll say to me, Ash, help us with confidence. I'm like, okay, let's stop right there. Let's stop about building confidence. That's going to come after. Let's talk about what made you feel like you lost your confidence. And it always comes down to someone said something, someone did something, society looking, I can't see representation of me. So we were never imposters. We weren't born feeling like we weren't good enough. At some point in our life, going through our life, things happened to us, things were said to us, or we witnessed things that made us feel like we don't belong. So
Yeah.
all of a sudden, we now feel like imposters. No, like, we need to stop trying to fix the individual and saying we're the problem. We need to look at society and say, how has society impacted us so much that has made us feel like we don't belong? And that's the problem, right? Women have faced it more than traditionally. It's happened more to women than men. Hence why we are like, oh no, I can't apply for that job because I've only got 6 out of 10 of the, like, I can't, I need 10 out of 10. Otherwise, I'm not good enough for this. And even when it comes to our pay, right? Every time we go and, like, if we are someone that has been paid lower, and imagine being South Asian, you're a woman, you're South Asian, so imagine your pay, there's a massive paid gap as to where you should actually be. The next job that you go for, they'll ask you, the employer will say to you, one thing that employers shouldn't ask is what was your previous pay, because you might have been massively underpaid. The other thing is that asking you the question, what do you feel like? Well, automatically you're going to think, well, I should probably, even if you ask for like 5 grand more, you're going to think like, oh my God, this is too much, because you've been made to feel
That
as
is
an
so true.
employer,
That,
as an
yeah, no, that's a
employer,
good
you
point.
should know how much that role is. You should have done your research that this role, this is the market price for this role, and this is what I'm going to pay. So if it means that ends up being 20 grand more, it means that it's going to be 20. You pay that person 20 grand more.
Ash, I mean, the points that you've made there are fantastic. And I've just thought back at roles that I've had previously where it's like, oh, actually, maybe I don't want to say that figure because, it might be a bit embarrassing. No, completely agree with that point. I just want to bring this back a bit. So I mentioned earlier in regards to the racism within the police force, which has been in the news quite recently. Now, what you're saying from everything that you've said from your clients is actually this is something that's quite prevalent in most workplaces. Obviously, maybe not to the same extent. However, a serious report has been done in the police. What can employers do within their system? Because DE&I has been hot over the last few years. I had a conversation earlier this week actually where someone mentioned it to me in a meeting, and she was like, look, I'm a bit embarrassed in saying this, but DE&I, and I'm like, well, yeah, that term has been used so often. It's now become embarrassing for us to use it. However, it's obviously not made an actual impact despite being used so much.
Don't
What
get
do
me wrong.
systems? Yeah, go for it.
Don't get me wrong. There are some organizations that are really making strides on it. Like, they are really investing. And I think that's where other organizations need to look at. Like, we need to move away from the performative stuff. We need to move away from, oh, let's celebrate Diwali, let's celebrate Bandi Chor, celebrate Eid, and let's send out all these messages, but actually your employees don't feel valued. Your employees are not progressing. Your employees are not being paid fairly. Like, that's all great, but if that's not followed up with all the other things, then that's problematic. If you don't have like a proper plan in place for how you're going to fight racism in the workplace, how your employees can feel safe, psychologically safe to report these incidents and know that something's going to be done about it, then we have a problem here. Like, you need to look at your strategy. People, organizations need to invest in it. This is the biggest problem, right? People aren't willing to invest. And the other thing is like you said, it became such a great after, let's be honest, after May 2020, the murder of George Floyd, that's what really sparked DE&I. Like, that's when it went, that's when people really started getting on with it. But has anything really changed in the 2 years? Because people have been so focused on the performative stuff that actually they're not making those real changes. They're not speaking to their employees and saying, what do you need? What can we do to help? Yes, there's change, but I still feel like we're still very much at the start. I mean, I would love to see a day when I'm made redundant and I don't have to do the job that I have to do anymore. But in all honesty, like, after working for myself and seeing what it's like out there, I don't think in my lifetime we're going to achieve that, which is so sad to say, but it's the reality. And like, if you look at research out there, we people don't take into consideration, like, even like the area that I live in, right? The schools that I see around me, they're quite affluent areas. Well, if people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, which we've seen are a lot of the South Asian community, like Pakistani, Bangladeshi, like, it's been shown that they're part of the lower socioeconomic background. Well, how are children being set up to win here? If you every single day there's like clubs and paying money for stuff and children can't access those, there's already going to start being a gap between the children, because the children are going to be like, oh, you never come to any of the clubs, or you never come to this. People can't afford these things. What are we doing to support children at that? I mean, I'm not being funny. Like, 2 days ago, I feel like I spent like nearly 300 quids on like a football, on swimming, on trips, on all sorts of things, right? And I'm like, not everyone is privileged enough to have this. So how are we setting people up to win? And unfortunately, it does affect the South Asian community, because when we look at the socio-economic background and like where they are, we are at the lowest right now, right? Like, we are impacted by it. So we're already the starting line. The starting line for us is already right at the back.
You've picked on so many things during this podcast, and one thing I love is the passion behind everything you're saying. I had a look at your Instagram, and there's you've got some funny clips on there as well, so, and it made sense. But as soon as it was interesting, because when Taj started talking about her own experience, your face changed and you got all serious, and you're like, I run this stuff. So I love the passion that you talk about it, and it is raising that awareness of actually what we're going through as a community is not acceptable.
And
So
there's so much that we haven't even touched upon, Val. Like, there's so much, like the mental health in our community, and then mental health, how that plays out in the workplace within the South Asian community. There's so much, there's so many layers to it within our community that we haven't even addressed, which I think it's so important. I mean, we may need another 10 podcasts to cover this, but I feel like there's so many areas that we haven't even explored that impact the South Asian community, which then ends up going into the workplace, and how that pans out.
Ash, I think you've just signed yourself up for another 10 podcasts with us. So, just as we come to an end with this podcast, if there's someone out there who's listening to this podcast that is having some problems in her workplace and it is to do with race, what would you advise? Give us a summary.
My thing would be, go see what your policy is on discrimination, on DEI. Speak to someone, like someone that you feel comfortable with. I don't want to say like, okay, you know what, if nothing's being done, like, that's it, just leave your organization. I always think, like, try, like, go and always look to see hope, and I pray that there is help out there and someone will take it seriously, whether it's your line manager, whether it's HR, or whether it's your manager's manager. But like, finding someone, if you have a mentor in the workplace, speak to them about it. And I think, don't ever walk away just thinking you haven't tried. And if you know, go through that, see what happens. I pray that things work out and they do actually take it seriously and it is investigated and dealt with appropriately. And I don't mean by giving someone a slap on the hand, actual accountability to know that we do not tolerate this behavior and it is not going to happen again, because that's the other big problem. And then the other thing that I would say was, if it's really impacting your well-being and really impacting your mental health and you know your life as well, then really ask yourself, is this worth it? And I know everyone's situation is different, because some people have financial burdens that they, you know, they can't just up and leave. But then start looking, because I promise you, you're in this position now, don't be in this mindset. And sometimes the impact that it can have on you is that no one's going to hire me again, like this is all I'm. No, there will be someone out there that will value you. And start looking. If you can, if you're in a privileged position where you can just up and leave for your well-being, if that's what you need to do that. If you have financial burdens, or you can't just up and leave, really look out there. And there's so many support networks. Honestly, there's so many support networks out for the South Asian community. You know, there's yourselves that listening to what you all have to speak about on the topics that you speak. I think that's really important. There's so many other resources that you can reach out there, that are out there for specifically the South Asian community. And I think really tap into that, tap into your network as well. Speak to your friends and your family, let them know how you're feeling. Speak, you know, if you need to go speak to your doctor and get extra therapy or whatever, if you can afford therapy, go for therapy. But I think if it's in your workplace and you feel like I've done everything and nothing's changing, then ask yourself, is it worth you putting yourself through that? And is it time you potentially start looking elsewhere?
Lovely. Thank you so much, Ash. Can you give our listeners your contact details in regards to your social media feeds? Because there might be a few people that might get in touch, hopefully. Well, hopefully not. Hopefully everything's changed where they don't need to get in touch,
No.
which... But could you give us your social media information?
So you can find me on LinkedIn, where I'm the most active, and you just search me at Ash Ahmad. That's with an AD, not an ED. And then on Instagram, it's underscore changing dot mindsets is my name.
So for those listeners who don't remember it otherwise, it's not too far from our own name. How do you think we got connected? Lovely. Thanks so much for your time today, Ash. It's been so insightful as to what's actually going on in the world and, you know, what changes need to be made.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much for having me.
Lovely. That's goodbye from me.
And that's goodbye from me.
Follow us on Instagram and Facebook, changing_suits, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.